Now, imagine you're in a place. You see the flooding water going up to your knees. You look up only to find black mold in the ceiling. And there is a funky smell. What's going on? And it turns out that you're in a prison built right on a landfill. Sounds pretty scary, right? But this is a situation that many prisoners are facing. So to protect their health, this summer I went to Florida and worked with Human Rights Defense Center, HRDC. HRDC is a nonprofit organization that advocates for all incarcerated population in this country. The project I'm working on is called Prison Ecology Project, which examines the intersection of mass incarceration, environmental health, and human rights. So what is mass incarceration? Mass incarceration occurred in 1980s, approximately the same time with war on drugs. Over the past few decades, the prison population in this country has increased by 500%. Now, with only 5% of the world's population, this country now have 25% of the world's prisoners. That's why we call mass incarceration. Why does it have to do with environmental health concern? Because when you're going to build a prison, you're not going to build it next to NYU. You are going to build it next to abandoned coal mines, landfills, waste dump sites, etc. Living on or next to these places expose people to environmental hazards. They have their water contaminated with lead and arsenic. They have black mold. They might have valley fever if they are in a prison in southwestern part of this country. And remember, many of these sites are actually Superfund sites, which means there are a ton of toxic chemicals there. And this is of a particular concern because if there's a natural disaster like a superstorm, so I remember when the Hurricane Harvey hit Texas, the flooding water flushed the Superfund sites and carries those toxic chemicals to the nearby facilities. And for those prisons, they are left screwed up. I spent a big chunk of my time there collecting public records. I was looking at violations of environmental laws over the past 5 years. We focused on air quality, water quality, as well as waste management. The reason we look at waste management is because prison ecology is not only about what's happening inside those prisons. It also affects the nearby community, because when you have a growing number of prisoners, you have overcrowding concern. And we have overcrowding if your facility is not updated to treat those human waste and sewage water. Guess what are they gonna do? They're gonna discharge the sewage water into the local river above their permit level. So it's not only about the prisons, it's also about the nearby neighborhood's environment. I collected the public records from more than 30 states, and as I expected, the majority of those violations are limited into certain facilities. For example, in Louisiana, there are more than 100 prisons and jails, and the majority of those violations can be found in 7 facilities. And for facilities like these, enforcement actions are basically not very effective. That you have exceeded level of lead in the water, and you receive a warning letter. Then you fail to change that. A few months later, you got a penalty letter. Then you pay the penalty. And then next year, the same process just happens. In June, we went to Texas and had our national Convergence. More than 100 people all across this country gathered in the University of Northern Texas. We talked, we had conversations, we had panels, and we have workshops. We talked to current prisoners via phone, and we discussed their lives and their health conditions. Talking to these people are absolutely an eye-opening, mind-blowing experience. And really, I learned a lot from them. 2 days later, we went to Fort Worth and had a protest in front of FMC Carswell, which is a prison for female. And it's notoriously known for killing many women there because of medical negligence. And it's also a prison close to a Superfund site. We went there. The police came, but we weren't afraid. We used a megaphone and chanted, "You are not forgotten, and you are not alone. We will fight to bring you home." A little bit of reflection here. I think for the general public, selling them the idea that prisoners deserve better treatment is very difficult. What is a better framing so that we can sell the story to them? In other words, why should we care about prisoners' health? Now, more and more public health officials are acknowledging that prisoners' health is a public health issue, not only because of the huge population of prisoners, but also because many diseases can be found in those prisons. In addition to environmental diseases, HIV/AIDS, hepatitis B and C, tuberculosis are highly prevalent in these prisons. And when these prisoners are released, they're going to carry those diseases back to the community. So it also affects our society. What are the obstacles? In addition to previous conception that they don't deserve better treatment, another obstacle is transparency. As I said, many of those prisons are located in a remote area, and we can't see what's going on inside. And for journalists, they are not allowed to get in there. So when you don't see what's happening there, you don't care. So I want to talk a little bit about why is this an international human rights issue. I mean, the prisoners' rights are by no means an issue for the United States. It's very common for basically every country. What makes the United States at the front line is because the United States has such a big prison populations. Prisoners' rights is also a highly controversial issue. I mean, for everyone here, we would agree that health, education, access to employment are fundamental human rights. But should prisoners have these rights? Should we deny these rights to those prisoners simply because they did something wrong before? I believe that simply because of the fact that you are a human being, you are endowed with certain rights. In terms of health, you should live in a safe environment, should not be exposed to diseases. And if you do get disease, you should have access to health care. What's next? Some good news. A couple of weeks ago, we got a letter from the EPA saying that they finally agreed to put prisoners into their EJ screen mapping tool. So along with schools and public housing, now you can see how many prisons are in this country. If you can see on the map, each dot would represent one prison. So now EPA is kind of acknowledged that prisoners are a vulnerable population and it deserves their attention when it comes to environmental justice. Also, HRDC is going to publish prisoners' letters, news, and public records on our own maps. So for criminal justice organizations, you can go to the website and see if there's any environmental violations around a certain prison. How does this experience relate to my study at NYU? As a public policy student, I'm always told to take into account the vulnerable population when you design public policy. This experience serves as a great opportunity for me to look at the social determinants of health, the idea that the social structure can unfairly affect the health of a certain population, especially for vulnerable ones. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about why the vulnerability of prisoners. Many people would regard prisoners as a dangerous group, but in many ways, they are also a very vulnerable population. Many of them were born in a single-parent family, low socioeconomic status, and they were released from prisons. Many of the rights are denied from them. The rights to vote, the rights to sit in a jury, the rights to get certain social services, and the rights to take a student loan. And I believe that we should not add environmental health on that list. Thank you so much.